I'm Ben Corriveau, and welcome to my show. Just for legal purposes, all of these opinions that are espoused in this show are my personal opinions and do not necessarily reflect the opinions of my any former, future, or current employers of myself. So let's get right into it. The first story, obviously the big one of the day, is the Supreme Court finally released their opinions in Learning Resources Incorporated versus Trump, which was the big tariff case they were that people have been waiting to hear on for a while now. Um, Personally, this is exactly what I was expecting, this result, because right now we're dealing with a Supreme Court that is largely focused on, well, the majority of the Supreme Court is focused on actually upholding the Constitution and the direct text of the Constitution. They aren't really focused on implied powers or expanding the powers. So this was already fairly easy to determine because under Article 1, I believe it's Section 8 of the U.S. Constitution, it directly gives Congress the power of the purse. So, particularly the House of Representatives, where all financial bills need to originate. But uh, all bills regarding finance need to come from Congress. That's a power directly granted to Congress. So, if we're reading from that interpretation, that does make sense. The reason I say that the majority is constitutional in that way is just because certain justices have in the past invented certain rights under the implied powers, such as with Obergefell, where they invented the right to gay marriage, because somewhere in the Constitution it apparently says that everybody has a right to be married, which isn't true. But that's what they claim. So those ones are, I would say, more just anti-Trump, and they're jumping on board because they can here. But in general, there's that camp, and then the other camp is which is the camp that I believe it was Kavanaugh, Justice Thomas, as well as Justice Alito. They all dissented in this case. It was a 6-3 decision in favor that the tariffs being implemented, and I'll get more into the specifics of it, but the tariffs being implemented were not correctly implemented. So it was this case basically revolved around the IEEPA, which was it's essentially the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, which provides Congress with the ability, well, basically, I'm sorry, let me rephrase that. It gives the president authority over certain aspects of the government during emergency situations. So if the president declares an emergency, they can take on these powers. In this case, Trump declared an emergency for one, the drug problem on our border, as well as the economic trade deficits that we were facing. And that's kind of how we finagled this. And then under section 202, section 202 of this bill, it'll be linked below so you can actually see what I'm talking about. But under section 202, it specifies the ways that the various situations in which the president can actually take on these powers, whereas Section 203 actually grants them the powers. Which Section 203 reads, at the times and to the extent specified in Section 202, the President may, under such regulations as he may prescribe by means of instructions, licenses, or otherwise, investigate, regulate, or prohibit any transactions in foreign exchange, transfer of credit or payments between, by, through, or to any banking institution to the extent that such transfers or payments involve any interest of any foreign country or a national thereof, the importing or exporting of a currency or securities by any person or with respect to any property subject to the jurisdiction of the United States. It does go on a little bit further, but that right there that I just read is the primary portion of this that this case was dealing with, because the question was whether or not these universal tariffs that Trump implemented were actually allowed under the IEEPA, and the Supreme Court ruled that they were not, which it's a mixed bag. Some people are saying that this is a great decision because it clarifies what powers the federal government, the executive branch in particular, has in emergency situations, which I do think is a good thing, and that is pretty much where I am. I know that that's how Trump ended up spinning this, because it didn't actually determine that Trump can't implement tariffs. We just need to start implementing tariffs on various different routes. But before I'll get into more of that, I do want to talk about what Justice Thomas and Alito's, because I believe it was either Alito or Kavanaugh. It was actually Kavanaugh wrote the dissent as well. Thomas did write a dissent, but it was very similar, and he did subscribe to Kavanaugh's dissent as well. But they basically, their problems were that under historical and legal precedent, the executive branch was granted plenary power over the implementation of tariffs in various situations, and this all arises under the non-delegation doctrine, which essentially says that Congress can delegate any area that they have control over, any power that they have that is not sorry, let me just pull up the quote so I'm not misrepresenting this. So, this principle, known as the non delegation doctrine, is rooted in the Constitution's legislative vesting clause and due process clause, Article 1, subsection 1, Amendment 5. Both clauses forbid Congress from delegating core legislative power, which is the power to make substantive rules setting the conditions for deprivations of life, liberty, or property. Neither clause prohibits Congress from delegating other kinds of power. And this was kind of the hinge point of the dissent, where the legal precedent is this, the non-delegation doctrine, where they can delegate powers which are not considered core to their functioning. And as I just read there, this was an excerpt directly from Justice Thomas's dissent, but it's pretty clear that the legal precedent is actually supporting the fact that Trump did have or Congress had the authority to give Trump access to these tariff measures under the IEEPA, as well as the other big issue was historical precedent, because we can see, still going through Thomas's dissent, the first Congress gave the president the power to prescribe rules and regulations that would govern any person licensed to trade with Indians. Trade with Indians was regarded as a matter of external relations. In 1815, Congress delegated to the president the power to lower reciprocal duties when he was satisfied that other nations' trade practices no longer operated to the disadvantage of the United States. This is quite literally what Trump is doing. So that directly applies here. And then let's see. Yeah, I mean I'll include this in my notes just so you can actually see this. But overall, it does look like legal and historical precedent does actually support that Trump has the powers to implement these tariffs under the IEEPA. But like I said, this was struck down. So right now, any existing tariffs are going to be maintained. The global tariffs, I believe, are being repealed under, or the tariffs that were implemented under the IEEPA Section 2, was it 202? Yeah, Section 202 will be revoked technically, and they will be reinstated under Section 122 of the Trade Act of 1974, which obviously is a different legal precedent, but it's going to have the same effect. Which, and this is coming from CBS News, they say that this this specific law lets the president impose duties of up to 15% for 150 days to deal with large and serious balance of payment issues. So to me, this is really just a method of maintaining the tariffs for a longer period of time while they evaluate various other legal options to implement these tariffs. And I'll be the first to say that tariffs are generally not good economic policy. Just historically, if you want to look at the free trade group of people, which is primarily focused on the capitalistic view of economies and functioning, which obviously works, but the free trade people will always say that tariffs they create a unnecessary barrier to entry for free trade, and therefore it's bad for economies because we're no longer able to immediately trade with each other. But there are certain reasons why we may want to implement tariffs. In particular, for us, we want to onshore jobs because we've outsourced a lot of production to various other countries, which, while it does make things cheaper for us, it also decreases the amount of people we have working in our country. So prices are lower, but wages are also lower to an extent if you're calculating averages. So is that really beneficial to a country? Then the other hand is, if we implement the tariffs, then we're benefiting American country. And this is why I support selective tariffs. If we implement tariffs on products that are readily produced in the US, what that'll do is it'll actually increase the base cost of various products of the same type being imported from other countries, while the actual products being built in the US will remain at similar price. And by doing this, it highly incentivizes people to purchase the American product, which, one, it makes sure that because Americans want fair wages. So it largely gets us out of the slave economies that exist in, for example, China, where they are not being paid nearly as much. They are not given a livable wage for their work. And it's so just being like a good person, that would benefit that. It'll also, like I said, increase jobs in the US, because if we're buying more American, then it allows them to ramp up production. Therefore, we can have more people hired in those jobs. And the other thing, too, is that by having these tariffs in place, it will also encourage us to increase production locally. So that way we can build more, which also benefits the economy. But overall, it's only in those instances because, like I said in my last episode, I'm a big cigar smoker. If you put tariffs on cigars, there's not really many places in the US that tobacco is grown and actually developed into premium cigars. So in those instances, you're kind of just punishing the American citizen for no benefit, really, aside from tax revenue, I guess, if you're going to count that as tax revenue. I know that Trump has said that he wants to give us $2,000 in tariff refunds, but we'll see where that goes. In other news with the Trump administration, we have Tricia McLaughlin is leaving as I believe she was the press secretary for DHS. Maybe it might. I don't believe it was actually press secretary, but she was the spokesperson. That's what it was. She was the spokesperson for DHS. So she's leaving. Reportedly, she's been wanting to leave since, I believe it was January. I might be wrong about that, but she has been planning on leaving for at least a month now, and she finally left. She's now being replaced by Katie Zachariah. I don't know too much about it, but I'll put up both of so Tricia McLaughlin's leaving post as well as Katie Zachariah's acceptance post, just so you can see what they're saying about that. But there was one big thing that happened this week was the hearing for State Department nominee Jeremy Carl, which Chris Murphy kind of attacked him. So let's pull that clip up right now.
Thank you. Senator Murphy.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all for appearing here today. Mr. Carl, I think it's just heartbreaking that you have been nominated for this position and that you've reached a panel before the United States Senate. But I do want to give you a chance to go a little bit deeper in your explanations of your personal beliefs. They are directly relevant to your fitness to serve. You already have had some of your statements read to you, but I'd like you to respond to at least a few of them. One of the things you have said is that anti-white discrimination is the most pervasive and politically salient form of racism today. So do you continue to believe that anti-white discrimination is more salient than the discrimination faced today by blacks, Latinos, Muslims, or other American groups?
Well, Senator, thank you for that question. And thank you also for giving me an opportunity to speak at a little bit of length. I haven't necessarily had much opportunity to respond.
I'm going to have at least one more question for you, so I'll give you a minute or two to respond.
Yes. So thanks to the great work of my friend Harmeet Dillon as the Assistant Attorney General of Civil Rights, I actually think that we've done an incredible job in this administration of getting rid of certain policies that discriminate particularly against white Americans, but also in some cases Asian Americans.
Well, just maybe answer my question. Let's rewind, because maybe you'll suggest that everything is fine now. Let's rewind a year ago. A year ago, were white Americans the most discriminated against group in the United States? You said it. So
yeah. Senator, no, certainly this is my belief. I'm not running away from that. I think that while, of course, all races in different contexts can be subject to really severe discrimination, that when we look at our legal structures, white Americans are often very disfavored in overt ways. We're seeing this in the Small Business Administration, many other places.
So your belief is that white Americans face more discrimination, at least prior to the Trump administration fixing this, than black Americans?
On average, Senator, yes, that's correct, and I'm not running away from that statement at all.
Okay, so in that clip, you could clearly see that he was questioning Jeremy Carl about white supremacy, not necessarily white supremacy, that was kind of implied, but he was asking about whether or not he believes that there is white discrimination disproportionately against white people over these past few years. And the main point he's trying to get at is something called the Great Replacement Theory, which I do have pulled up here from Encyclopedia Britannica. Replacement theory in the United States and certain other Western countries whose populations are mostly white is a far-right conspiracy theory alleging, in one of its versions, that left-leaning domestic or international elites on their own initiative or under the direction of Jewish co-conspirators are attempting to replace white citizens with non-white immigrants. Okay. That's the claim. So, let's see, because I would say that in the real world, this is less of a theory and more a problem with people calling it out. And I'll go over some of the history of this. So let's start in 2002, Harvard Magazine. They have an article titled "Abolish the White Race." Now, this is in 2002. And this is a direct quote from the article. "The goal of abolishing the white race is on its face so desirable that some may find it hard to believe that it could incur any opposition other than from committed white supremacists." So I mean that right there kind of disproves the whole thing that this great replacement theory is a conspiracy theory. Well, I mean you're kind of openly saying it, but let's see what other people are saying. So CNN, white supremacy with a tan. "Here's the hard truth we must face about the future. We may live someday in an America where there are no racial majorities, but whiteness can still reign supreme. Nothing will change, though, unless we go after the racial hierarchy that makes whiteness such an exclusive club." Okay, so apparently being white is a problem, but not like you may be white, but you're not actually white. For like in terms of you're part of the whiteness problem, but you're not white. Because that totally makes sense. Obviously, this guy must have a DEI degree. That's from 2021. Now let's go to the Atlantic and see what they're saying. So this is from 2022. America needs anti-racialism. According to prominent proponents of this view, such as the Boston University professor and Atlantic contributing writer Ibram X. Kendi and the New York Times Magazine writer Nicole Hannah-Jones, racism is the defining fact of American life, and the old colorblind liberalism is woefully insufficient to address it. The only way our racist history can be overcome, in their view, is for Americans to become more explicitly conscious of race and racism, embrace educational paradigms that center race, and pursue policies that aim not for equal treatment, but for equity or equal outcomes among groups. As Kendi summarized this position, the only remedy to racist discrimination is anti-racist discrimination. So, the solution to discrimination is to discriminate. which is that's crazy to me. But I thought this was all just a theory. This is all just a crazy right wing conspiracy theory that whiteness is being erased because these people don't want whiteness erased. They just say that they want whiteness erased and they want more people of color. Let's continue on in the same article. Bracketing the question of whether anti racism offers an accurate diagnosis of contemporary American life, it is a clear appeal to certain powerful constituencies, which have been willing to advance its tenets, even when doing so has proven politically costly. What is less understood, however, is the opposition to liberal anti racism. Over the past 2 years, we've seen a wave of parental complaints and legislation against anti racist school curricula, critical race theory, or CRT, and backlash against politicians and district attorneys who have adopted anti racism inflected approaches to crime and public safety. Yes, I would say that that's very fair because, unlike the people who say that we need to discriminate against everybody, my position is let's just not discriminate against anybody. And that doesn't mean like it if I observe a problem, I'm going to explain the problem. Like a lot of people they say that that's racist, but I don't care if you're black, you're white, you're Hispanic. I don't care. If you do something, I'm calling you out for it because it's wrong. And this is particularly interesting because they make this claim about adopting anti racism inflected approaches to crime and public safety. So does that mean that if somebody commits a crime that they aren't being punished for it? Because that seems to be what it is. I believe it's called restorative justice is what they've been pushing here, where it's essentially an intervention if you're caught for a crime as opposed to actually being punished for the crime, which if you have an intervention, it's kind of implied that they're going to do the crime again because why wouldn't they? They just all that they got was had to sit down and be talked to. They weren't punished for it, none of that, which is ridiculous. And that was from 2022. Now back to 2021. This is an opinion piece in CNN. White fear is the wrong way to tell the census story. In this context, the preliminary data from the new U.S. Census, which reveals a declining white population, exposes ways in which America's changing demographic landscape is stoking paranoia regarding the loss of white power, even as it also fuels ambitious hopes for the future of multiracial democracy. Once again, they are openly admitting that the white population is declining, the black population is or the minority population is increasing, and they're celebrating it because it rises towards multicultural multiracial democracy is what they're saying here. In general, it's multicultural if you want to include immigrants in it as well, but typically it's like I said, multicultural, not multiracial. But so they're actually admitting to the very thing that they're saying is a conspiracy theory. And just one more. This is from what is this? This is University of New Hampshire. They did a study and they show fertility rates diminished regardless of race or Hispanic origin, and immigration declines were also widespread. As a result, the growth rate of both the minority and non-Hispanic white population diminished. Yet the racial diversity of the population continued to grow, according to new Census Bureau estimates. This increasing diversity reflects two important demographic trends. The minority population is growing, and the non-Hispanic white population is declining. This interplay of white and minority demographic change increased diversity. So, if you tell white people that they're all evil and that they're bad and that they shouldn't have kids, and you tell them that enough, they're going to stop having kids. And that's what's happening. And then if you tell minorities that they're the best thing ever, they can't do anything wrong, and they continue having kids, then they're going to increase, which there's nothing wrong with that. We should be encouraging every person to procreate and have more kids. I get that there's some arguments where some people may not be as intelligent, they may not be intelligent enough to have kids, but kids is great for literally anybody. It's good for society. It's good for the family. You'll feel much more fulfilled when you have kids. So we should be encouraging that across the board. But I mean, it's kind of funny that you call this out and it's a right-wing conspiracy theory, but when you say it and you're a Democrat or you're a leftist, you're celebrated for being brave and you're being anti-racist. I just want standards for everybody. Like this is a simple one. If you're calling something out, it's not a conspiracy theory, especially if the other side is openly saying the same thing and celebrating it. If I call it out as and say it's a bad thing, why am I the conspiracy theorist for it? And actually, these people have gone so far that they're actually saying that they need to take over America because they're the majority. Let's see that. This is Gene Wu on the Define American with Jose Antonio Vargas.
You've hit exactly the right point. It's not just Latinos, it's not just Asians, it's not just African Americans, it's everybody. Right? Yes. Our country and the forces that be, the powers that be, have spent tremendous time, effort, and money to make sure that those groups are never united, that they always see each other as enemies and as competitors, without ever realizing that they share one thing in common, that their oppressors all are the same. Right? The oppression comes from one place. And I always tell people the day the Latino, African American, Asian, and other communities realize that they share the same oppressor is the day we start winning. Because we are the majority in this country now. We have the ability to take over this country and to do what is needed for everyone and to make things fair. But the problem is our communities are divided. They're completely divided. And I talk about this all the time, is that like for Asian Americans and for African Americans, we probably have one of the worst relationships between any community.
Okay, so once again, I've been reliably informed that this is a right-wing conspiracy theory, but here he is celebrating it and actually saying that they need to recognize that they're the majority and take over the country because the white people are oppressing them. I mean, it's just crazy to me that people actually believe that me recognizing this is, like I said, a conspiracy theory, but them claiming that it's true and celebrating it is just perfectly fine. And I mean, the natural conclusion of this is that white people hate themselves. And this is actually big in the Democrat Party. Here's a clip. This was from 2025, I believe, where this representative was actually it was a Kentucky representative, where she actually tells us that she's not proud of being white.
Don't feel good about being white every day for a lot of reasons, because it's a point of privilege that I get to move through the world in a way that so many of my other colleagues and friends and family members in the community don't get the privilege to do. And I'm just a female, but just a woman, just a white woman. If I was a white man, I would be functioning from a point of even greater privilege. I think we're missing an opportunity when kids have a moment to reflect about how the color of their skin does and does not allow them to move through the world. Running to them and trying to stifle that and trying to say you shouldn't feel bad, so we don't want to ever expose you to something that is going to make you have to pause and have maybe some internal feelings. It's a missed opportunity for some really good dialogue. It's not about making people feel bad about being white. I think it's about acknowledging the historical privilege that white people have always had in this country, which I don't know that anybody in this room in good conscience could argue exist and still exist.
See, this is particularly sad to me because not only does she say that she feels guilty for being white, but she wants to push this on kids and basically tell them that if you're white, you're evil. You should feel guilty. About what? I mean, realistically, I didn't like. I mean, just taking myself as for example, I didn't have anything to do with the racism. I didn't have anything to do with the slave trade. Absolutely nothing. Am I supposed to pay for the sins of my fathers? Like my potentially my great grandfather? I mean, that's just ludicrous. Why are we going back generations? But it's just sad that this woman wants us to teach our kids that. But luckily, most Americans don't think so. A new poll came out this past week where showing that the majority of Americans think that Democrats are too liberal, which is funny because they're still pushing to the left. But let's pull up that clip right here.
The results from that special election, that Democratic primary in the 11th district in New Jersey, speak to a larger point within the Democratic Party, and that is that the far left is significantly more powerful than they once were. This sort of gives the game away here. Democrats who identify as very liberal or conservative. You know, there used to be a lot of conservative Democrats, right? Back in 1999, 26% of Democrats self-identified as conservative. Just 5% said that they were very liberal. It was a smidgen, a smidgen, a smidgen. Now that far left has gained considerably in power. Look at this. Now we're talking about a fifth of Democrats, 21% say they're very liberal. That conservative part of the Democratic Party, adios amigos, goodbye, just 8%. And when you combine the 21% who are very liberal with those who say that they're somewhat liberal, we're talking about 3 in 5 Democrats who identify as either somewhat liberal or very liberal, with the very liberals a much larger portion of the party. The far left, which used to just be a smidgen within the Democratic Party, has gained considerable power, as you saw in New Jersey's 11th district.
What about Democratic socialists, like the likes of, you've got Bernie Sanders or Zoran Mandani here in New York City? Where does that line up?
Okay, so on a separate question where you essentially, CNN asked this last year, which was, okay, Democrats who think of themselves as democratic socialists, among all Democrats, including those independents who lean towards the Democratic Party, look at this. We're talking about a third of all Democrats who identify as democratic socialists. Bernie Sanders and Zoran Mandani are not alone. They are a considerable part of the Democratic base at this point. And more than that, if you look at Democrats under the age of 35, they are nearly half of the Democratic Party. Look at this. 42% of Democrats think of themselves as democratic socialists under the age of 35, just like Zoran Mandani. What happened in New York City is not some aberration, right? It is not something that just happened in New York City. It is something that we are seeing grow within the Democratic Party at this particular point, when we're talking about 42% of Democrats under the age of 35 identifying as democratic socialists, and a third of all Democrats. My goodness gracious.
So if the ideology of the Democratic Party is shifting or changing, how are people feeling about it?
Okay, so we're talking about the Democratic base, right? But what about all Americans, right? How about all voters? Voters who say the Democrats are now too liberal. Look at this percentage. It was 42% in 96, 48% in 2013, now 58% in 2025 of all voters say that the Democratic Party is too liberal. The Democrats are moving to the left, the far left is gaining power, and there could be some electoral repercussions, because what we see right now is voters, the clear majority, say that they are too liberal.
This is really interesting. Thanks so much, Harry.
Thank you.
So naturally, it's just a pretty good thing that most Americans are finally recognizing that the Democrat Party has gone too far to the left. But unfortunately, the Democrats aren't recognizing it, and they're pushing even further to the left, which it's only going to cause more problems for the country, particularly because what this type of behavior incentivizes is you have a group of people in the party. So in the poll, it was showing 33%, because I'm just going based off of the whole party, not necessarily the various demographics within the party. But you have 33% of that party consider themselves democratic socialists, which are more radical than the Democrats, which is very, very crazy to say in the first place, because Democrats are already fairly radical. But these people are extremely radical. So what they do is they encourage their politicians to gerrymander, just like what's happening now in California and Virginia, in response to the Republicans gerrymandering, which Republicans are doing because the left has gone so far to the left. So this back and forth, what it's actually encouraging is strongholds of radicalization. So we're essentially eliminating any places where moderates could win, and there's no really need to actually moderate policies, because there are so many conservatives leaving blue areas that they just become more entrenched in the Democrat policies, while conservative areas get more and more red as people are leaving those Democrat places to move to more conservative places. And it basically results in building of tensions, which will ultimately result in some sort of conflict. Hopefully, not a civil war, but I wouldn't be surprised based on the way things have been heading, particularly with the leftist violence. But that's a topic for another day. I mean, speaking of violence, though, we had another transgender shooting this week. This one has happened in Pawtucket, Rhode Island, which is not very far from where I am. It's probably about 20 to 30 minutes away from where I am right now. And once again, these things can be seen in advance. This guy was reportedly, I know it says he was a Trump supporter. He was a Trump supporter, a Massey supporter, what's her name? MTG, Marjorie Taylor Greene. He was a Marjorie Taylor Greene supporter. He was a Nazi. He publicly spoke out supporting Nazi causes. He was big against the Jews. So, I mean, all this stuff is coming out from the left. But if you look at it from the right, like the conservative perspective, he was transgender. So he thought he identified as a girl. And he took all the various procedures. I believe he got I know for a woman trying to become a man is mastectomy to remove the breasts, but he got breast implants. I believe he did start taking the hormone treatment, which he was already an unstable guy. He then got approved for those treatments, and not only that, but he was then able to purchase firearms while being in this mental state, which is he deluded with reality. It seems like it was narcissistic based on some reporting from his wife or his former wife, because they did get divorced. But it's not very surprising that this happened. And I mean, even the day before he even did this, he actually said that he would go berserk. Let me get the exact quote right here. "Keep bashing us, but do not wonder why we go berserk." This was a post from him one day before he shot up the Pawtucket ice rink. And I believe he killed 2, and there were 5 injured in total. I'm not entirely certain about the numbers there, but I do know that it was his ex-wife and one of his kids were killed in the shooting, which is very unfortunate. But this is what happens when you play into people's delusions and lie to them about reality, which Stephen Colbert doesn't seem to have a problem with. I mean, right here, this past week, he was supposed to have an interview with James Tallarico, and this basically blew up because he said that Trump was pressuring him and preventing him from actually having this. And that CBS News, which was his broadcast, or CBS was his broadcasting platform, they were playing directly into Trump's strong arming from the FCC. But what actually happened there is that the FCC has this rule where if you're going to have a political candidate on your show, you are required to give the opponent of that person equal time. Jimmy Kimmel didn't want to do that. So this guy right here that he had on was James Tallarico. He's a Democrat running for, I don't remember exactly where, but he's running for office. And so he's running for Texas state representative. Oh, that's right. Yep, I'm sorry. This makes sense because the opponent that Jimmy Kimmel didn't, or Stephen Colbert, I'm sorry. I mixed the two of them up. Stephen Colbert didn't want to have on his show was Jasmine Crockett. And instead of publicly admitting that, what he did is he blamed Trump for it, and then said that his broadcasting network intentionally prevented him from publishing it, so that way he could drum up attention and have this interview anyways. Which all he did was he put it up on YouTube. So he's a bit of a scumbag here for that. I mean, like, these kinds of people need to be held accountable for their lies. I mean, he does it so often, and this is just the latest instance of this, where it's a blatant lie. Like, nowhere in there is there any way that Trump is the reason behind this? It's literally the FCC have had this equal time rule for a year, like decades even, I believe. I believe it's been around since basically the beginning of public broadcasting. But yeah, he decided to blame Trump for it, even though I believe he thinks that it's benefiting his party because Jasmine Crockett's kind of crazy. She's not definitely not the brightest bulb, but she's running for state rep in Texas, and I really think that even though I don't like her, she should have at least had the opportunity to go on if Stephen Colbert was going to do something like this. But let's just see her response.
We did receive information suggesting that the federal government did not shut down this segment. Number one, that is my understanding, that the federal government didn't shut this down, and we will do an official statement once we get another official statement that we anticipate is going to be coming from Paramount. All right, so we will read what they say, and then we'll go from there. It is our understanding that Colbert, either Mr. Colbert or CBS, decided that they just didn't want to hear it. And this was because of a fear that the FCC may say something to them, and that there may have been advice to just have me on, and then they could clear the issue. It was my understanding that someone somewhere decided we just don't want to do that, and instead we're going to just do it.
Yeah, so obviously she wasn't too happy about this, and she even recognizes that this didn't have anything to do with the Trump administration. This had everything to do with Stephen Colbert just not wanting her on his show because he felt that she would harm the Democrat image, and it would maybe she did get elected, but if she was the nominee, it was very unlikely that she would be elected in Texas. But overall, I doubt that this won't be nearly as big of a mess as was caused this week in the Potomac with the big sewage spill that happened there. So this actually happened when a section of the Potomac Interceptor, which is a sewage treatment line, it collapsed in Maryland, spilling approximately 194 million gallons of sewage. I believe it. I forget if that was the overflow or the amount spilled. Let me just double check that. So it had an overflow of roughly 243 million gallons, and this is from the Hill. Like I said, all my sources are publicly available, so you can look on as I'm doing this. Luckily, it seems like public health officials have said that there's no impact on the drinking water, but just to stay away from it due to the toxins. I mean, obviously, this is a massive problem because why did we allow this to get to the point that the sewage was able to, like, why was the pipe not maintained, essentially, is my point. Because this should have been maintained. I mean, we know with Flint, Michigan, that there were problems there. That should have been a wake-up call. But it seems like it wasn't. I mean, and it's unfortunate, but in this instance, it's looking like it may have been a DEI problem. Because the company that actually oversees this pipeline is called DC Water. And it looks like they have purposefully implemented various DEI policies to benefit not the most qualified, but the most marginalized of people, which is not a good way to run things. I mean, you always want competent people doing your jobs. If they're not competent, then you're going to have mistakes like this. And I'm not saying that this was the reason why. I'm just saying that this did happen, and they had the DEI stuff prior to that. So it could be related, could not be. I'll leave that up to you to decide. But I'm just giving you what information I do have. So if you actually look into this article, this is from the Daily Caller. They did an investigation into the DEI aspects of this company, particularly the CEO. So they awarded approximately 38.65% of their contracts to quote unquote disadvantaged and woman-owned businesses. So this isn't necessarily a problem in and of itself, because but it's possible for that many people to actually be like very, let's see, the disadvantaged and women-owned businesses to actually be at the top of their field. I don't have the statistics on that. I'm not gonna go into anything about that, but it could theoretically be possible. So I'll give them a pass for that. But let's see what else they say. So this is a quote from the article. Though no longer enforced, DC Water's website still lists 3-year goals of awarding 32% of construction contracts and 28% of architectural and engineering services to minority enterprises, with additional carve outs for women owned firms. And they had no response when questioned about this. So to me, this seems like they are intentionally targeting marginalized or various disadvantaged, as they would say, organizations, as opposed to going for the best fit organizations, which is inherently problematic for various reasons. I mean, the first place is by putting quotas on this, such as 32% for the construction contracts. What they're doing is they're essentially saying that 32% have to be of this category. So if, let's say that you have 100 construction companies and you're saying 32% of them need to be of this, what is it, minority or woman owned organization, and you only, of those 100 that you only have 15 that are minority or woman owned. And I'm not basing this off of any statistics. I'm just like saying this right now. So that means that 15% of the total available construction companies actually fit your criteria. But your goal is to have 32%. So if you want 32%, you then need to decrease the upper end of organizations that you're actually going to work with. So let's say that they want let's say that they're aiming for a 50%. Just for example's sake, I know that it's 32. I just don't feel like doing the math in my head. But if they want a 50% split between minority and women owned versus non-minority or women owned, then we would have to cut down the available pool to 30 businesses, which means that we have 15 non-minority owned businesses and 15 minority owned businesses. Now, if you consider variability in terms of human skill and various production and quality of work and all these different factors, how likely is it that you cutting down your pool to those 30 companies and automatically giving those 15 minority and women owned businesses access to it? So already, like, you're cutting out a significant portion of the population that could be better at the job, but you're just giving it to them just cause. Which, so that already introduces areas where it is possible for there to be degradations in the quality of work. But the other problem with this too is that, let's go back to my example, you only have 15 minority and women owned companies. If they know that there's only 15 of them, and they know that they're going to be selected 100% of the time in order to reach these goals that these organizations have, what they will do is they will increase their prices for these organizations, because the organization had the goal. So they're going to say, well, we have to meet our goal, so we're going to pay the extra money. And what this does is it incentivizes people to invest, to actually form these businesses regardless of the quality of work, because you could essentially form a business, like a woman or a minority organization could create a business with very low cost. I'm not saying that it's easy, but you could do it for low cost. And if you're in one of these areas where there is a small number of these organizations in existence, and they have these policies implemented where they are required to have a certain percentage of their work done by this minority or woman-owned business, they're going to get selected every time, regardless of the quality of their work. So why would, like, they could just raise the prices to whatever they want, and that's just not good for anybody, really. It leads to fraud, and they're spending more for services that they aren't being rendered, essentially, because they are still being rendered, they're just at lower quality than would otherwise be available. So that's why all this DEI stuff is bad. Like I said, though, this may or may not have been DEI. It could have been just they weren't properly paying attention to it. I don't know, but this indication does the fact that they did have these DEI policies in place, and this happened at this around a similar time. It is certainly suspicious, and it could have been the problem, but we'll see. But based on all that information, the Trump administration. So I'm sorry. Based on the fact that this sewage spill happened and everything, they've been calling for Trump to bring help and help them essentially clean up the mess, while they are simultaneously shutting down DHS. So Trump has halted FEMA deployment because they're not getting paid, because the Democrats have shut down DHS. Or technically, I believe it's just DHS due to the funding package. And the reason the Democrats have done this is because their claim is that they want to shut down DHS over ICE operations. But what they aren't telling you is that ICE has been funded through 2029 via the One Big Beautiful Bill. So what they're doing is literally grandstanding. Like their impact is only hurting everyday Americans, whether it's through FEMA not being able to help the people who are suffering from this event, whether it's TSA, they're not being paid, so it's going to be slower lines going through planes and all that. It makes things less secure because they aren't necessarily showing up for their work, so there's more people or less people doing more work. There's also, I believe the Coast Guard is impacted by this because they're part of DHS. So these are actually impacting Americans, and they're still not signing any bills for funding because they want to stick it to ICE, even though ICE isn't being impacted. So I mean, it's just ridiculous to me. But ICE needs to keep up with the illegal alien operations. I know one of the big defeats this week was in relation to Kilmar Abrego Garcia. This is Senator Chris Van Hollen's favorite illegal. I think he had like a date with him or something. He went to El Salvador to visit him, and they had a little lunch date. But I mean, all kidding aside, I don't know why the left chooses to hoist this guy up as their hero. I mean, he's alleged to be a member of MS-13, and he was in the country illegally, but they're saying that due to a supposed administrative error that he was illegally deported and all that. So let's go through the timeline quick. So in October, so this looks like it's October 10th of 2019. Yep. This is when a petition was filed by Kilmar Abrego Garcia to have a deportation stay. So it's a withholding of removal only to the country of Guatemala. And his reason was because of various family problems that he had in Guatemala related to gang violence, and that he felt that he would be targeted by it. And this was granted by a judge. Which all this document means is that he cannot be deported to Guatemala, which has absolutely nothing to do with anything else. But so he's an El Salvadoran, and he has this order of withholding from Guatemala, and he's in the country illegally, which is recognized in this document, as his asylum claim was denied. So when Trump came into office, he deported this man along with, I believe it was 20 others, to El Salvador. And because this is where the guy was from, so I mean, it makes sense to deport you to your home country. But then all of a sudden, there was somebody found out that he was deported to El Salvador. He was called a Maryland man, even though he was from El Salvador. So he was an El Salvadoran, not a Maryland man. So they found out this, and the Trump administration immediately went on defense. And one of their legal counselors publicly stated that there was an administrative error, and that's why he was deported. Now, what a lot of people don't know is that this statement was actually walked back by Stephen Miller, um, because it wasn't true in the first place, that there was no administrative error, or at least for him, because the original thought was that the administrative error was that he had this order of withholding from El Salvador, but it turns out that the order of withholding was from Guatemala, not El Salvador. So it was perfectly legal to be deported to El Salvador. He could have been deported literally anywhere except for Guatemala. But and they all jumped on this, and Judge Boasberg, he's a federal judge, he ordered Trump to return over all the Venezuelans that were deported under the Alien Enemies Act, particularly this man, Kilmar Abrego Garcia, which is crazy because this is the first time that we have ever seen a federal judge say that the executive branch must engage in foreign affairs to return somebody who was legally deported. Which it's insane that even happened. That James Boasberg thought that he had the power to tell the Trump administration that they must engage in foreign affairs. Which that's a power reserved to the federal branch for good reason, because we don't need judges telling us whether or not we need to interact with foreign countries. I mean, it's completely up to the executive. But that happened. It ended up working its way up to the Supreme Court, where the Supreme Court ruled that Trump had to facilitate the return of Abrego Garcia. Now, this is very, very controversial because they were saying the decision essentially said that he had to allow for the acceptance of Abrego Garcia if El Salvador chose to return him, which El Salvador ultimately ended up doing. So Trump was then forced to accept him, which is very ridiculous. I mean, he was legally deported, and all the evidence shows that. Like, the only deportation state or with order of withholding that he had was for Guatemala, and he didn't go anywhere near. He went to El Salvador, not Guatemala. But this whole happened, and then just this week, a new judge ruled that the federal government can't take Kilmar Abrego Garcia back into custody because somehow this fits the double jeopardy rule. I don't know how, because he was legally deported in the first place. They said they had to return him for literally no reason. And then all of a sudden now he can't be arrested for being an illegal, even though it's documented that he was in the country illegally. I mean, this is just craziness. Regardless of where you stand on politics, there is no reason why this man shouldn't be able to be deported. Like, legitimately, every single piece of evidence indicates that he was in the country illegally, he was deported legally, and then it was extrajudicial powers that were used to force the executive branch to return him. So now they're saying that he can't be redetained. I kind of hope that goes to the Supreme Court and they rule that he can be redetained, but I doubt that's going to happen. If it does, it's going to be probably another year or two down the road, which is way too long. So I don't even know what to say about that. But related to that, the Department of Transportation had a big release this week that it turns out that in Illinois, there were... So in Illinois, you can get non-domicile CDLs, which are commercial driving licenses. And these are specifically for people who are not residents or are not citizens of the United States. So they reviewed this, and they found out that nearly 20% of those CDLs were illegally issued. Whether that be because the person's legal status ended prior to being issued the CDL, or they didn't pass the test and they received the CDL anyways, nearly 20%. So these people need to be held accountable, because that is absolutely ridiculous that we have that high of a percentage of CDLs being issued illegally, especially after, I know we've only had 2 big crashes, but that's too many by illegal aliens. I mean, it's just ridiculous. But obviously the left likes lying about stuff. And one of the other things that they've been lying about is this story about a teacher being killed by ICE this week. So I have this pulled up from the Revolt right now. This is the article title. And the only reason I'm specifying this is because most people only look at the title of an article and they don't actually read it. So this is by far the most influential part of the piece. And the title of this is "Another Family and Community Are in Mourning After Beloved Black Teacher is Killed After ICE Traffic Stop in Georgia." So what they're implying here is that this woman was killed because she was black, and it was done by ICE, because this happened. So because it specifically says black teacher is killed after ICE traffic stop, it's implied that the ICE officers killed her after a traffic stop because she was black. That's what's implied here. Now let's get to what actually happened. It turns out that there was an ICE traffic stop of an illegal alien. That wasn't this woman. It was a completely different person. And this illegal alien chose to run. So that, they drove away in their car, and while driving away, they crashed into this woman's car and killed her. It's absolutely tragic. I mean, I'm very sorry to hear that, because she should be alive today. But these people are being disingenuous in what actually happened. This is completely the fault of the illegal alien. This has nothing to do with ICE, unless you want to say that it's ICE's fault that he ran, in which case, should we not have cops? Because cops are supposed to instill fear in criminals so that way they don't commit crimes. And this person committed a crime, was about to be held accountable for it, and instead chose to run and ended up killing this woman. I mean, it's just ridiculous. We need to, these people need to be called out for this. I mean, these aliens need to face consequences, but certain aliens might not necessarily face consequences, and we'll see about that. But this all comes about as Obama gave an interview on the Brian Tyler Cohen show, where he was asked about aliens, and he said that they do exist. They're just not at Area 51.
A couple questions here. Are aliens real?
They're real, but I haven't seen them, and they're not being kept in, what is it?
Area 51?
Area 51. There's no underground facility, unless there's this enormous conspiracy, and they hid it from the President of the United States.
What was the first question you wanted answered when you became president?
Where are the aliens?
Where are the aliens?
So he clearly states that aliens are real. I'm of a different opinion, but there's no evidence either way whether or not aliens exist. So it's purely based on the individual in terms of probability. I would say, because I when I grew up, I watched a lot of those history alien documentaries, and I do find it definitely interesting that the ancient Egypt stuff with the aliens, where they believe that those gods that they came up with were aliens, which to me means that they're demons, because I mean any false god is a demon essentially, Catholic theology. But regardless, I don't necessarily know if they're real or not. I tend to say if they are, then they would be classified as demons. If not, then they're not real, and they're still demons because they're false. They're basically illusions that were implanted in the minds of other people by some higher power, in this case probably Satan, and that's why they were driven to worship false gods. But he said that. He then backtracked it a little bit. I'll put up the X post now just so you can see what I'm talking about. And in response to this, Trump actually went on he actually answered this, and I'll pull up that clip right here.
Barack Obama said that aliens are real. Have you seen any evidence of non-human visitors to Earth?
Well, he gave classified information. He's not supposed to be doing that. You know?
So aliens are real?
Well, I don't know if they're real or not. I can tell you he gave classified information. He's not supposed to be doing that. He made a big mistake. He took it out of classified information. No, I don't have an opinion on it. I never talk about it. A lot of people do. A lot of people believe it. Do you believe it, Peter?
Well, the president can declassify anything that he wants to,
Well,
so if
maybe
you
I'll
want to
get
make
him out
an
of trouble.
announcement.
I may get him out of trouble by declassifying.
We know illegal aliens are real.
Yeah, illegal. Only illegals. What else?
So that happened yesterday, where Trump went out and said that, which I thought was absolutely hilarious, and I actually put up a post about it. It's right up here, just so you can see what I said. But he had the unique opportunity to either charge Obama with leaking classified information, or he could declassify the information. And even regardless of that, he essentially confirmed in this statement that what Obama said was true because he said it was classified information. But in the aftermath of this, like right after this, I actually believe it was last night, around 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, he publicly put up a Truth Social post saying that he is ordering the immediate release of all documents related to aliens, extraterrestrials, UFOs, which are unidentified flying objects, and UAPs, unidentified aerial phenomenon. So, to me, overall, I think that this is basically a hoax. Overall, I think that this is a hoax because, I mean, Obama knows what's in those files. He was president for 8 years. He knows what's in the files. And I have a sneaking suspicion that the reason he talked about it on Brian Tyler Cohen's show is to convince Trump, or to basically have enough of a public uproar that Trump will say, okay, I'll release them. And then all the conspiracy theorists and all the alien people are going to get mad at him when he releases the files and there's nothing big in them, because I genuinely think that there's just not really much that we're going to find out from these files. And obviously these people are going to still believe it, and they're going to blame Trump for it, which I think it's possible that's the case. I don't really know, but we'll see if this goes as well as the Epstein files have or not, which it's funny because this week we actually had one of the first arrests in relation to these Epstein files, which was Prince Andrew. So on Thursday, I believe it was. I'm sorry, it was Wednesday. He was arrested under suspicion of misconduct in public office. That's the charge, which to me basically says that they don't have a good case against him because it's only suspected misconduct and not actual, like there's no claim of misconduct aside from suspected. This was later updated to include information regarding him potentially sharing secrets with Epstein while he was British trade envoy, which, if there's evidence of it, he should be held accountable. Like I said, to me, this is kind of nothing because it's just suspicion and it's only of that. I think that if there was evidence of him committing actual crimes, such as like what we all suspected, which was of basically an island full of pedophiles and the elites were all participating in it. If there were evidence of that, I do believe that he would have been charged under that instead of this, because like I said, this is just suspicion. Maybe they'll find the evidence that they're looking for later on, and that's why they're just trying to get this out of the way, so that way when that evidence comes out, they can say that he's already been charged. But I don't know. It's definitely interesting. Like I said, though, I don't anticipate much coming out of this. I know some people say it's big news because he's facing life in prison, but like I said, it could be bigger, and maybe it will be later on, but right now it's not looking to be that big to me. Like I said before, the Epstein files, if there were big information in it, people would have been charged by now. I think. If not, then they may be under active investigation. But we'll see. Um, Speaking of Epstein, though, it does seem like he tried to have access across the globe, particularly in the Middle East. And this is people have known this for a while, particularly because his partner Ghislaine Maxwell, and I say partner because they were business partners. Really, I don't know if they were intimate, like if they had an intimate relationship, but they were business partners in this organization. So her father was apparently very big in Israeli intelligence. So that's probably why he was building out this network. But we'll see. Obviously, there's just suspicion now, and it looks like he was trying to do something there, but I haven't seen much evidence regarding that. And the only reason I bring this up is because of the big story that everybody knows about, that we may be going to war with Iran. So it seems like all week this has been big news from the independent sources. Sources warn that U.S. is getting closer to war with Iran. It definitely seems like it's on the table, because even outside of this, there was a supposed 4chan leak. I'll put it up if I can find it. But there was a supposed 4chan leak regarding these operations where they're saying we are going to war. Obviously, we've had a bunch of naval movements over into that region. So we have significant forces over there. I believe it's the biggest naval movement in recent history. So be prepared for that. I know that Trump did give them a deadline of 10 to 15 days to basically reach an agreement regarding their nuclear program, or else they would face a quote unquote unfortunate outcome. Which I'll say this here. I don't want to go to war with Iran. I get that they are the largest state sponsor of terror in the world, and they're one of our greatest adversaries behind China and Russia. But I don't think that necessarily warrants a hot war with them. If we were to do something like what we did in Venezuela, and we're prepared for the power vacuum that happens if we do that and take out the Iranian regime, I would definitely support it. But my concern is that we need to be prepared for what happens, like I said, in the aftermath of taking out the Iranian regime, because there's just so many variables, and the Middle East has always been a hotbed of this stuff, like terrorism and disorder. So I would much prefer if we didn't get involved there. But if that's what it takes, that's what it takes. Like I said, I don't want to go to war, but I'm up for a limited invasion such that it's quick and accomplishes our goals. And that just about wraps it up for this episode. The one thing that I do want to shout out is americasdigitalshield.com. So I did hear about this earlier this week, where this website actually goes through and shows the bias going on various different platforms. So you can see where they are, if a given platform is pushing content one way as opposed to another. And it's interesting. You can go to the website and find it out yourself, but all very, very specifically, it seems like very consistently, it trends left leaning for most organizations. There are a few like X. X is actually pretty good. Looks like it's been going back and forth fairly reasonably. Reddit looks like it's almost always left leaning. YouTube, it's had over the course of all time, it's had about 2 spikes. But you can see this and more information by going to the website, and I highly recommend you do, just to see what's influencing you and get off the platforms that are misleading you. So, yeah, thank you. And I hope that you return next week for my next episode of the Ben Corriveau Show.